I am Shannon, last name Laux. I became a mom on May 28th, 2002. Well, in the sense that he was born that day. It's funny though, when I remember back, I think we do become a mom the moment we find out we're pregnant. We had been away for 17 days in Europe on our honeymoon, and we came back. It's worth noticing that mentioning we went on our honeymoon. We left Canada on September 10th, 2001, which means we were in Paris or getting to Paris when the Twin Towers in the US were knocked over. So to say it was a chaotic time to be traveling is an understatement. Anyways, the day before we were to fly home, I was ready to be home. I was tired. I was confused as to why you have to keep on paying to pee, and why I had to pee all the time, and why I had carried a box of tampons all over Europe for 17 days if I was never going to have to use the damn things. I could have left them at home. And I remember my husband thought it would be the most romantic idea to find out that we were having a child in Paris. And so he's like, we should take a pregnancy test. And I was like, that's the worst idea ever. I don't want to pee on a stick. I just want to get to the airport. I want to sit at the airport. I want to know I'm going home. I've had enough of this vacation. So I did not. But when we finally did get home, the first thing I did was go and buy a pregnancy test, and found out I was pregnant and let him know he was right. And I remember I had to go to work that afternoon. It was a new job. And I was working from 1 till 3 o'clock or something. It was a preschool job. And I can still see myself walking from my car into the building to teach, thinking that I suddenly had this very precious thing to keep safe that no one could see. And I think that that's the moment I think I became a mom, because I was already trying to keep something outside of myself alive, and it felt so fragile and it felt so breakable. And so maybe it isn't the moment that our children are born that we become a mother. Maybe it's the moment we find out they're growing inside of us. Though in that same thread, the moment when they're born, and now there's a different effort required to keep them alive, that's a whole new level of caregiving, mothering. I had a home birth, and I was tired and sore, and it was the early days of having birthed him. I don't know if it was the first, second, third, but it was within those first very brand new days. And I remember sitting in a bath and aching from head to toe, and like a fatigue I had never before known. And I had this practice where I would count forward. I'd be like, okay, Friday is in 4 sleeps. So it'd be 4 sleeps, just 4 sleeps. I got this. And I sat there in the bath to do that, because it had always brought me sweet relief to know, okay, these are the days that I have to mark my way through. And there was no end that I could see. And I wept, and I wept, and I wept. Because as much as people had prepared me for becoming a mom, and the diapers, and even the lack of sleep, and the changing, and the crying, and whatever else there was that people tied in or associated to mothering, nobody had told me that a part of me on that birthing mat, or that, for me at the end of my bed where I brought this child into the world, nobody told me that the woman I was, the woman who existed the second before that happened, would be gone forever. because there was no getting back to that prior state. And I don't even think I acknowledged the carefreeness that had come prior to motherhood. Everybody talks about motherhood as this heroic, beautiful thing that we do, which in a lot of ways I agree with, but we're not talking about the profound sense of loss that comes when you're no longer solely responsible for yourself. And you've brought this life in, and you will always have this tag on your heart that will make you question everything from that minute forward. Where I had been confident, I knew how to be a teacher, I knew how to be a woman, I knew how to be a wife, I had no clue how to be a mom. And any confidence that I had garnered from, those past experiences, they didn't seem to come forward with me. They weren't there when I looked at this little human who was so vulnerable. I lost a lot of my assured sense of self and my confidence there, and I wasn't prepared to be processing that while also trying to keep this human alive. So that's something I think that is a big part of the conversation when we talk about motherhood, is to talk about the loss as well as the enrichment, and to not sugarcoat ourselves around it. Yeah, it's hard. I've been known to say more than once, motherhood to me has been a series of joy right next to grief. Great joy sidelined by grief. Because all these moments that we experience with our kids, their first walk, the first time Mitchell walked was like, oh my gosh, he's like conquered this unbelievable thing. He can walk. And my baby will never be a crawler again. And we're forced almost by the world around us to celebrate and not to mourn. And every step our children take from the moment they're born, every skill they gain is to get away from us, to really step away from us. And that's what we want. We want that. We want I wanted that. I want his beautiful independence. I wanted him to go out in the world. I just didn't know he would take so much. Now the two of them, would take so much of my sense of self with them. Yeah. It's really fallen apart. It's a fallen apart, had to be put back together, fallen apart again, had to be put back together. And that's been my experience of motherhood. A series of extreme, like, joy I didn't even know existed before meeting these two little humans, and grief that could tear down my sense of self to nothing. And then bring it back up, bring it up back, and knock it back down. And part of that for me has been exploring what we're sold about motherhood. What are we told about motherhood? It's supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to be glorious. It's supposed to be celebrated. And I stayed home with my kids. And in staying home with my kids, I gave up a career that was anything but them. And I remember this conversation I had recently, and this woman looked at me and she was like, but what now? Like, you don't have a career, you don't have anything. That was some mild panic there, because in the world that exists outside of my family. I don't have anything. I can't walk in anywhere and get a job that pays me. Well, I mean, might pay me more than I've been making as a mother, but there's no way that we as a society take the work I've done over the past 17 and a half years and translates it into economic value. So I find myself now with a 17-and-a-half-year-old and a 15-and-a-half-year-old asking myself, who am I? And what did I do these last 17-and-a-half years? My heart knows I did something really beautiful because there's two great human beings. But I still live in a world where that won't be my last chapter. So I find myself almost sitting in that bathtub all over again and noticing that this journey of motherhood, of reclaiming who we are, rewriting who we are, redefining who we are, it doesn't end.